Steve and I and our little Sandy want to wish you a Merry Christmas. We're celebrating with friends this Christmas, and so we just want to say thank you for your friendship, your support, your encouragement. And Steve and I think about it this year, especially when President Biden signed the Respect for Marriage. Steve and I, as a married couple, give thanks for all of those gay and lesbian couples who have gone before us, but also today as we celebrate as a family. Thank you. Many blessings to you. And Steve, you want to say anything?
Happy holidays.
Merry Christmas. Thank you.
Merry Christmas, Chalice. I'm honored and humbled to be serving as the moderator in the coming year at Chalice. And it's not going to be easy to follow Pete. He's done a wonderful job. Every year at Christmas time, I like to reflect on the year. And as I was doing that with Chalice, the year at Chalice, I think we've had a pretty remarkable year. Some things I thought about, the fact that we've been able to have Zoom and in-person services every Sunday. We've hosted 15 nights of food and fellowship with our homeless neighbors. We had a foot washing service. We had visitors who have attended most Sundays during the year. We got to meet Susan and learn more about her work in Haiti. We had members attend the Phoenix Pride event. We secured the services for another year of our talented Pastor Vernon, as he will work with us through the next transition. We've enjoyed music every Sunday, and even from some of our very youngest members. And we attended the regional meetings. We've also worked hard to sell the building, and while that hasn't happened yet, I'm certain that when the right time comes and the right offer comes, it will all come together perfectly. But I congratulate our congregation on all the work that's done, because it has not been easy. Importantly, too, we've had a number of members face health challenges during the year. And while some of those are resolved, some continue to struggle. So my Christmas wish for our church is based on 1 Corinthians 13:13. Because three things will always remain: faith, hope, and love. And the greatest is love. So as we finish this year out and look forward to the coming year, my Christmas wish is that we remain grounded in faith, hope, and love, and that we know that whatever challenges or concerns we face together, the light will outshine any darkness because of Jesus' birth. Merry Christmas.
Today I have a Christmas greeting for you. It's called The Christmas Present. It's written by Amy. In recent weeks, I've been reflecting on how Jesus coming into the world teaches us about presence and how Jesus is the presence of the Father, God with us. One of the Hebrew words translated as presence in the Old Testament is panim, which can also be translated as face. I love this because it reveals something of the nearness of God's presence in the close personal encounter we can have with God face to face. As Psalm 67:1 tells us, to experience God's presence is to experience the light in God's shining face. Present is one of those wonderfully rich words that can have all sorts of meanings. When we think of Christmas presents, we think of gifts. Jesus certainly is the self-gift of the Father to the world. But to be present also means to be here, to be near, to turn up, to exist in this moment now, to be accessible. Isn't it wonderful that Jesus coming means all these things as well? When I look at Jesus' life and ministry, I'm struck by how totally present he was to everyone and in everything. Whether in prayer to the Father, in conversation with the people he encountered, in proclaiming the kingdom, in ministering to people's needs, in listening to their concerns, in suffering, in dying, and in rising, Jesus was fully present in each particular moment. I wonder if this Christmas we can practice being fully present in this particular moment, to these particular people in this particular place, without thinking of what comes next. Can we accept this moment as a gift from God to be lived to the full?
Joy to the world, the Lord is come. Let earth receive her King. Let every heart prepare Him room. And heaven and nature sing. And heaven and nature sing. And heaven and nature sing. Joy to the world, the Savior reigns. Let all their songs impose, while fields and floods, rocks, hills and plains, repeat the sounding joy. Repeat the sounding joy. Repeat the sounding joy. He rules the world with truth and grace, and makes the nations prove the glories of His righteousness, and wonders of His love, and wonders of His love, and wonders of His love.
This is the season of Advent, the time when we are all on our way to Bethlehem. But who can show us the way? Prophets can show us the way. Prophets like Isaiah spoke and listened to God. Isaiah said the Messiah was coming, and that Messiah would be like a light shining in the darkness. This is the light of Isaiah. It reminds us to listen for God. Mary and Joseph are on their way to Bethlehem too. They have a secret. An angel came to them and said, "Be joyful. Do not be afraid. You will have God's special son, and you will name him Jesus." Mary, Joseph, and the donkey are on their way to Bethlehem, so they can show us the way. This is the light of the Holy Family. It reminds us to be joyful. The shepherds are on their way to Bethlehem too, so they can show us the way. An angel came to them and said, "Do not be afraid. You will find God's special son in a manger in Bethlehem." The shepherds and their sheep are on their way to Bethlehem. This is the light of the shepherds. It reminds us not to be afraid. The heavens declare the glory of God. The star can show us the way to Bethlehem. The star reminds us of the glory of the heavens. . This is the light of the star. Today is Christmas. We are all in Bethlehem today. Here is the Christ child in the manger. Christ, the light of the world. Here is the Christ, the light of Christ that is always with us. Let us enjoy the lights. Watch how I change the light. So the light of the prophets, the light of the Holy Family, the light of the shepherds, the light of the star, and the light of Christ can be with us in every place and in every time. I wonder where you might be in this story today. I wonder which part of this story speaks to you this year, this Christmas. I wonder what you're wondering about the story.
Growing up in the Catholic Church, we always looked forward to going to midnight mass. We would go over to my aunt and uncle's house for a little Christmas Eve festivities. And because it was at midnight, the service was at midnight, I'd go home, take a nap, and I was an altar server, so I had to be on my best behavior, right? On my awakeness at that point. We'd go to midnight mass, and I can remember walking into a church. We had a large church, and church members had spent all day hand tinseling every branch. We had real trees, no artificial trees back then. Hand tinseled every branch. The lights on the tree were blue. And it was just amazing to walk into the church and see the blue lights and the shimmering tinsel on the trees and the beautiful poinsettias. It was always a special moment, a very holy moment. The choir, the music. Well, it was 2 o'clock in the evening, 2 o'clock in the morning by the time we got done with the service. So everybody was just exhausted the next day on Christmas. Many years later in the parish that I served at, we decided that we'd have some family liturgies and children's liturgies. And we would begin those at 3 o'clock on Christmas Eve and have like 5 services, with the last service Christmas Eve being, wait for it, 10 o'clock. We knew midnight was going to be way too late for everybody after all of the services that we already had. So we'd have a 10 o'clock service, and I always had fun with it because people would call up saying, what time is your midnight service? Well, like they should have guessed, right? Midnight? But we'd say 10 o'clock. And they'd go, no, what time is your midnight service? 10 o'clock? 10 o'clock was a special service for that church with all of the children's liturgies. It was a more formal, traditional adult service. But here we are now in the 21st century with Zoom. We've come through the pandemic. We've had COVID. We're still in the midst of RSV and the flu and COVID going around. So this is the best way that we can communicate now through Zoom. And I really do want to share some thoughts with you on the scriptures. We've heard this scripture with the children's word. And the scriptures today tell us, as Luke tells the story, and remember, it's just a story. Nobody was there. Mary, Joseph, that's all who was there. Nobody was there to film it, to video it. It was just them, Mary, Joseph, and going through the pains of labor. I remember early on in my ministry, there was a spiritual writer, and he told the story at one meeting that I was at. is how as a priest, he always had the desire to be present at the birth of a child. Because for those of us who have not had the experience of childbirth, it's always kind of a mystery to us. And he told the story how he shared that one time, and a church member of his invited him or asked him to be present at the birth of their child. And so the very first time that I heard that story, I came back to my congregation and I said, guess what? I would really like to experience that, because I would not have an opportunity to experience the birth of a child. And so a church member, believe it or not, they had a child late in their marriage. They already had 3 other older children. And they said, we'd like you to be present. I said, okay. They said, now you have to be ready, because we just don't know how fast this is going to happen. I said, don't worry. They called me about 10 o'clock that evening. I zipped in the car and got down to the hospital. And there I was in the delivery room. I have to tell you, it was a little frightening because there were things probably that I should never have imagined as a priest, as a celibate, to ever be a part of. But in any event, as she went through labor and the child comes and she holds the child in her arm, I knew right then how special that was to them as parents. I watched them check the fingers. And those of you who are parents, you know, right? You know how this goes. You check the fingers, you check the baby. And there they were just overjoyed. I was in tears because I was so overjoyed. I have to imagine that that's how it was for Mary and Joseph. They were parents. But imagine the conditions in which they were giving birth. Not a fancy hospital, sterile environment. There they were, as Luke tells the story, in a stable where animals were kept. There, in the midst of all those sights and smells of being in a barn, Mary and Joseph give birth to their child, their firstborn, Luke tells us. How special a moment. But I have to think about this, how vulnerable they were as parents, but how vulnerable that newborn child was. Again, none of the antiseptic, nothing. It was dirty and smelly. And there in that place, now according to our theology, right? God takes flesh. Imagine that. A part of this Christmas story tells us that God chooses to be born into the world in the most vulnerable, in the most simple place you could ever imagine. That's what God is about, sharing our vulnerability, sharing our humanness, watching parents hold their newborn child filled with joy, anxiety, because they just were not sure what was going to happen from that point on. I want to say today that as you celebrate Christmas, to share that vulnerability with each other. Tell the stories to your children about how they were born. Share the joy of their life. Hold them, love them, hold each other, love each other. I think that's the greatest gift that Christmas gives to us this year, even if it's only through Zoom, that we can be, as Chalice Christian Church, we can be a community that loves our children, that stands in the midst of vulnerability with them, but also is willing to love, even if it's risky to love. Merry Christmas to you. Many blessings as you celebrate Christmas this year.
Angels we have heard on high, sweetly singing o'er the plains, and the mountains in reply, echoing their joyous strains. Gloria in excelsis Deo. sometime.